Yes, we're back with another rider, another episode. Today we have two lovely ladies all the way from Australia, South Africa and India, and they are studying their PhD, and we're just going to learn all about why they've chosen the specialist subjects they're doing and what they're going to be contributing to the world. So nice to have you here today, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you, we're very excited.
Okay, that's good. So first of all, what's your names?
My name's Lehari.
Lahiri.
My name's Yvonne.
Okay, that's good. How did you meet? How did you two meet?
Well, we have the same supervisor at the University of Brighton, and yeah, that's how we kind of got introduced to each other. And yeah.
Okay, that's good. That's good. So you're doing the same subjects?
Yeah, it's pretty similar. We're both looking at museums and heritage studies and museum practice and also decolonizing museums.
Okay. You got your hands full then. Because I was in the British Museum or British Library, and they had all these artifacts about Egypt, and then they went down, and then there's a bit arrow pointing to the basement, and it said "Welcome to Africa."
Yeah.
And then it was like there's a couple of voodoo masks, and that man, there's a Nigerian tribe where they dress in like this. It's like loads of ribbons, and they do that dance, and that was it. And it's like, okay, so you think that we had nothing to do with civilization? But anyway, they haven't spoken to talk about me. Why do you girls feel the need to change up the museums, and what's that journey been like for you?
Well, speaking of the British Museum, that's the Sainsbury Gallery. This is Africa, Welcome to Africa. And I actually did my master's on that and how terrible it is and how it doesn't represent what Africa is actually like, because, Africa is a continent, not a country, and we're an incredibly complex place. So that's one of the reasons why I am interested in decolonizing the museum and talking about colonialism, because a lot of people here don't actually know about the horrors of that history and how it's still really prevalent today. So that's, yeah.
Yeah, I come at it from a slightly different angle, but incidentally, I also did my master's on the British Museum, and part of it was in the Sainsbury Gallery. But I'm looking at museum education practice and how, people sort of take tours or, take tours for schools and do workshops and programming and things. And the British Museum has this collecting an empire trail that they started to talk about their different collections and where they came from. And part of it was the Benin bronzes as well as the Parthenon marbles. And I would recommend people checking it out, sharing how you feel about it, because it's quite an interesting space. Yeah.
So I understand the Nigerians want the Benin mask back. You familiar with that?
Yes, so the Benin bronzes were taken by quite a well-known raid of Benin, the Kingdom of Benin, by British soldiers. Sorry, I can't remember the exact information. But Nigeria has been asking for the bronzes and other material to be returned for quite a while. And the Horniman Museum, which is where we're going to now, is the first museum to actually return some of the bronzes. And they're being returned to the Oba in the Kingdom of Benin, which is in Nigeria. So it's one of the big cases of repatriation where things are actually starting to be returned. But they were on display in the Sainsbury Africa Gallery for a long time without a discussion of the really violent event and looting of how they got there.
It's interesting, you speak of this Sainsbury's. Now, do you know the London Museum?
I haven't been there. I've been to the Docklands one.
Yeah, right. The Docklands is actually called a London Museum, but it's in the Docklands. You're talking the one in the old cargo warehouse next to the canal.
Yeah,
that's it. So it's got a sister museum, which is in the Barbican. So you've got two branches. But I noticed there's a Sainsbury's section in that museum, and I thought, what's Sainsbury's got to do with museums? And I'm hoping you can tell me, because you keep on talking about Sainsbury's.
Well, I don't know the politics around that, but it is very common for very big companies to fund particular galleries in different museums or like different projects and things. There's a lot of politics around that. If you've sort of seen recent protests in the British Museum around their funding with British Petroleum, or BP they call themselves now, and Adani the Green Futures Gallery at the Science Museum. And there's a lot of activists, practitioners, and different people who are really interested in these collections to kind of have these museums divest from that funding, because basically if you are promoting science and science of climate change, how can you then be getting money from big oil companies that are the biggest promoters of climate or the biggest cause for climate change? And I would definitely check out things like BP or Not to BP, who have been really vocal and do these amazing performances to kind of shed light on this.
But that's interesting, because if someone's doing something wrong, that you take the money and use it for something good, is it then wrong?
So one of the most famous cases is the Sackler family, who were sort of in charge of, I don't know all the information about the spread of OxyContin, the company that,
the drug company.
So what the Sackler family have done is throw a lot of money into museums and art institutions like the Guggenheim, and at Oxford there's the Sackler Library, which has just now, they're renaming it because they don't want to be connected to the family anymore.
But the family paid for it.
Yeah, so the Sackler family would use their own private wealth to put in money to support all these institutions. But in particular, they were interested in the arts, and it's a way of sort of whitewashing all their sins to say, but look, we're putting all this money and funding into the arts and the humanities and these things that are so important. But what it's doing, it's a PR exercise. Not that this funding isn't important. This funding is desperately needed. But the reason why they're doing it is to make themselves look good and to take attention away from what is actually going under the surface, like in the US with the opioid.
I would also say that part of it is the amount of editorial control.
In 200.
The amount of sort of editorial control that these funders have over the content in these museums varies greatly. So a lot of it is dependent on these museums being transparent about this process, getting freedom of information, requests in place. A lot of organizations have done that. Some of this information is publicly available, but it takes the work of a lot of activists and artists and practitioners to actually divulge this information.
Would you consider yourselves activists? You're writing a dissertation, or what's that, 5 years or something it's going to take you?
Well, I guess if you're working on decolonialism and histories of empire in the UK, especially coming from countries that were previously colonized, you end up becoming a type of activist because your research is divisive and you are trying to tell stories and bring forth narratives that talk about histories of violence and marginalized people that actively being suppressed. So to an extent, yes, but we very much also work within these institutions, so it's a bit complicated. I don't know, Lahiri, why you...
Yeah, that's a good point, because those institutions fund universities, don't they?
Yes.
So your 70 grand a year or whatever they give you a PhD is probably come from that.
Not nearly.
Tell us the process. How do you address these universities?
So,
or these boards, these museums, sorry?
Well, I mean, I don't identify as an activist because I think the work that activists do, takes a lot of different sorts of effort and a different set of skills that I don't personally feel like I have. But I mean, I definitely do feel very passionately about decolonization, but it's sometimes separate from the way I write my work. But I do identify as someone who works in museums. I have worked in museums before. The way I feel about activism is that we as practitioners are also trying to change the museum in whatever way we can. I'm not even sure, sometimes it's a little at a time. Sometimes it can be a change in displays, and sometimes it can be, radically changing the structure of museums. So it varies, but it is very much a case by case thing rather than something that can be applied to all museums, because not everything is like the British Museum or like the national museums. There are local museums who are doing fantastic things but don't get as much attention or as much funding as I think they deserve.
You've been great guests.
Thank you.
If anybody wants to find you,
Thank you.
and support you in what you're doing, can they find you on social media?
Yeah.
If so, where on social media? What's your handles?
So I have my handle on Twitter, which is LAHAREEM17. I think that's it. Yeah. And it's on Twitter.
So I'm on Twitter as well, and it's at EVCM, so that's EVIECM. And yeah, we try to be as active as we can there, and there's an amazing community of decolonial scholars who are there, and if you want more information, then you can definitely check them out, and they're experts, and we're only students.
That's your attention. Well, thanks a lot for that, and we wish you well.
Thank you.
We hope that episode enhanced your life. We post an interview every day as well as vlogging on our social media channels. Don't forget to subscribe to get our latest episode.